I want to focus on interest rates. You came here in July, and I spent my 5 minutes laying out reasons why you should not then increase interest rates. My most gullible friends believe that I was successful in persuading you, and hence that is the reason why interest rates have not gone up. I have some gullible friends. But I want to keep doing it. As I argued then, back in the summer, God's plan is not for things to rise in the autumn. As a matter of fact, that's why we call it fall. Nor is it God's plan for things to rise in the winter through the snow. God's plan is that things rise in the spring, and so if you want to be good with the Almighty, you might want to delay until May. And I know there are a bunch of things you're aware of. Many economists say we shouldn't move forward now. Managing director of the IMF has been fairly candid. We've got deflationary risk. We just have a bad growth report. And you're aware of it, but you probably won't estimate it as highly as I will because of my occupation. But don't underestimate the ability of politicians in both Europe and the United States to screw things up. I mentioned last time you were here the psychological advantage to retirees of nominal interest rates of 4 to 5% so they can live on their retirement savings without a nominal invasion of principal. That psychological benefit is not in the GDP statistics. As a matter of fact, you reduce the GDP statistics because they're not going to psychologists and spending money, which would be part of the GDP, but it does enhance and then finally, as I pointed out to you, and I do want to talk to you privately about this, how FASB is coming up with this new $2 trillion change that will hurt construction, depress the economy. The other thing is that if you act too soon and you decide, oops, we acted too soon, you put yourself in a position first where you have a zigzag policy, and you will face criticism from that by some people I know. And second, if you then want to go in the other direction, you only got a quarter point to play with. So if you hit the brake too soon and decide, oops, I got to hit the accelerator, you don't have any gas. With that in mind, I'm concerned about the effect raising interest rates now would have on the real estate recovery, and I would ask you what you would think the impact would be of raising interest rates on the housing recovery, and would we squeeze creditworthy borrowers out of the housing market and create a negative feedback loop with prices going down?
So you've made a large number of very good points and indicated many relevant considerations that the committee is trying to weigh and balance and has been taking into account. With respect to the housing market, of course, the level of mortgage rates is relevant to housing, and so we're very aware that, for example, a sharp rise in mortgage rates could have a very negative effect on housing. We do, however, have a recovering economy where employment is going up, income is going up, households are in better shape to form households, whether it's that they're moving into rental properties. The millennials seem to have a strong preference for later house purchases, but we do envision gradual recovery in the economy, in the housing sector. Let me come back to the point that I made earlier, which is the committee anticipates a very gradual increase in interest rates. We're not envisioning that when we begin to raise rates, we're going to be looking at a very steep path of interest rates that would cause the kind of harm that you're worried about to the housing sector. So that whole path matters, and that is a gradual path.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
Now, the ARB, after conducting, Madam Secretary, more than 100 interviews, identify a specific employee and a specific employee at the State Department who denied these requests. It was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, Charlene Lamb, and again, she did come before the Oversight Committee. The ARB report was very critical of her. It was also critical of her two supervisors, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security. The Oversight Committee found the same answer as the ARB. It found that this official denied these requests, and it found no evidence that you approved or denied them. The problem is that Republicans just keep asking the same question over and over again and pretend they don't know the answer. In 2013, the Republican chairman of 5 House committees issued a report falsely accusing you personally of denying these requests in a cable over your signature. The next day, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, went on national television and accused you of the same thing. Can we play that clip, please?
Secretary of State was just wrong. She said she did not participate in this, and yet only a few months before the attack, she outright denied security in her signature in a cable, April 2012.
Do you remember that allegation, Madam Secretary?
I do.
Well, when the Washington Post fact checker examined this claim, they gave it 4 Pinocchios. They called it a whopper. It turns out that the Republicans had a copy of that cable, but they didn't tell the American people that your so-called signature was just a stamp that appeared on millions of cables from the State Department every single year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Madam Secretary, my goal has always been to gather facts and to defend the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Last year, I asked our staff to compile an asked and answered database, and this specific issue was answered thoroughly. On Monday, we put out another report, and this issue was addressed yet again. But the Republicans want to keep this attack going, so they are now trying to argue that we have new emails that raise new questions. The truth is that we have reviewed these emails, and they don't contradict the previous conclusions. They confirm them. They corroborate them. We've reviewed emails from Ambassador Stevens, and they show that he asked Charlene Lamb for more security. Nothing we have obtained, not the new interviews or the new emails, changes the basic facts we have known for 3 years. Secretary Clinton, let me ask one final question, and please take as much time as you want to answer this. There's no evidence to support the Republican claims that you personally rejected security requests. So some have argued that since you knew the danger was increasing in Libya, you should have been in there making detailed decisions about whether there should be 5, 7, or even 9 security officers at any given post. Madam Secretary, I know you have answered over again. You might want to just elaborate and just, I have a minute and 7 seconds.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think there has been some confusion, and I welcome the opportunity to try to clarify it to the best of my ability. With respect, as you rightly point out, the claims that were made about the cables, I think you have explained the fact, which is that it's the long-standing tradition of the State Department for cables from around the world to be sent to and sent from the State Department under the signature, over the signature of the Secretary of State. It's a stamp. It's just part of the tradition. There are millions of them, as you point out. They are sorted through and directed to the appropriate personnel. Very few of them ever come to my attention. None of them with respect to security regarding Benghazi did. Then the other point, which I thank you for raising so that perhaps I can speak to this one as well. There is, of course, information that we were obtaining about the increasingly dangerous environment in Libya, across the country, but in particular in eastern Libya. And we were aware of that, and we were certainly taking that into account. There was no actionable intelligence on September 11th or even before that date about any kind of planned attack on our compound in Benghazi. And there were a lot of debates, apparently, that went on within the security professionals about what to provide, because they did have to prioritize. The Accountability Review Board pointed that out. The State Department has historically, and certainly before this terrible incident, not had the amount of money that we thought would be necessary to do what was required to protect everyone. So, of course, there had to be priorities. And that was something that the security professionals dealt with. I think that both Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering made it very clear that they thought that the high threat post should move to a higher level of scrutiny, and we had immediately moved to do that.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair would now recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks.
Good morning, Secretary Clinton.
Morning.
Thank you for being here today. In drawing on what you just said, that very few, but no requests for Benghazi came to your attention, I'd like to show you something. This pile represents the emails that you sent or received about Libya in 2011, from February through December of 2011. This pile represents the emails you sent or received from early 2012 until the day of the attack. There are 795 emails in this pile. We've counted them. There are 67 emails in this pile in 2012. And I'm troubled by what I see here. And so my questions relate to these piles. In this pile in 2011, I see daily updates, sometimes hourly updates, from your staff about Benghazi and Chris Stevens. When I look at this pile in 2012, I only see a handful of emails to you from your senior staff about Benghazi, and I have several questions for you about this disparity, because we know from talking to your senior advisors that they knew, and many of them are here today, seated behind you, they knew to send you important information, issues that were of importance to you, and I can only conclude by your own records that there was a lack of interest in Libya in 2012. So let's first focus, though, on this pile and what was happening in Libya in 2011. We had an ambassador to Libya, Ambassador Kretz, but you've told us that, and you told us in your opening, you handpicked Chris Stevens to be your special representative in Benghazi, and you sent him there. And by your own emails, most have provided last February, a few provided just a few weeks ago, they show that in March of 11, so we're in March of 11, you had Chris Stevens join you in Paris, where you were meeting with the leader of the Libyan revolution. And after Paris, that is when, as you talked about, Chris Stevens went into Benghazi, I believe in April 5th of 2011, on that Greek cargo ship. How long was he expected to stay? What were Chris Stevens' orders from you about Libya and about Benghazi specifically?
Chris Stevens was asked to go to Benghazi to do reconnaissance, to try to figure out who were the leaders of the insurgency who were based in Benghazi, what their goals were, what they understood would happen if they were successful. It was, as I said, the hard-nosed 21st century diplomacy that is rooted in the old-fashioned necessary work of building relationships and gathering information.
How long was he anticipated to stay in Benghazi? Do you recall?
It was open-ended. we were, in discussing it with him, unsure as to how productive it would be, whether it would be appropriate for him to stay for a long time or a short time. That was very much going to depend upon Chris's own assessment. We knew we were sending someone who understood the area, who understood the language, who understood a lot of the personalities because of the historical study that he used to love to do, and we were going to be guided by what he decided.
I'd like to draw your attention to an email. It's an email found at tab 1. It's an Ops Center email that was forwarded to you from Huma Abedin on Sunday, March 27th, that says at the bottom of the email, so the current game plan is for Mr. Stevens to move no later Wednesday from Malta to Benghazi, but the bottom of the email says the goal of this one-day trip is for him to lay the groundwork for a stay of up to 30 days. So just to refresh that recollection, I believe initially the goal was to go in for 30 days. Were you personally briefed on his security plan prior to him going into Libya? Because yes, at that time, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry to interrupt, Gaddafi's forces were still battling the rebels, correct?
Right. That's right.
And so were you personally briefed before you sent Mr. Stevens into Benghazi?
I was personally told by the officials who were in the State Department, who were immediately above Chris, who were making the plans for him to go in, that it was going to be expeditionary diplomacy. It was going to require him to make a lot of judgments on the ground about what he could accomplish, and including where it would be safe for him to be and how long for him to stay. And I think the initial decision was, up to 30 days and reassess, but it could have been 10 days, it could have been 60 days, depending upon what he found and what he reported back to us.
And possibly what was determined about the danger of Benghazi. Who were those officials? Secretary
Well, there were a number of officials who were working...
That were advising you on the security specifically.
Well, with respect to the security, this was a particular concern of the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau in which Chris worked.
And I'm sorry, what was that person's name?
Assistant Secretary Jeff Feldman.
Thank you.
And it was also a concern of the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security, as well as other officials within the State Department. And I think it's fair to say, Congresswoman, this was, we all knew, a risky undertaking. And it was something that was, as I said in my opening statement, more reminiscent of the way diplomacy was practiced back in the 19th century, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have instantaneous communications. You would send diplomats and envoys into places and not hear from them for maybe months. This was obviously not of that kind, but it was not that different in degree from what we had done before, and it was a risky undertaking, and one which Chris volunteered for and was anxious to undertake.
And it was so risky, I'd like to pull up another email from the Ops Center that was forwarded to you from Ms. Abedin on Sunday, April 10th. So he had been there about 5 days, and it indicates that the situation in Ajdabiya had worsened to the point where Stevens is considering departing from Benghazi. This is within 5 days of him going in. Were you aware of that concern within the first 5 days that he had gone in?
Yeah.
And did anyone share that with you? And
yes.
Who did share that with you?
We were aware because we were really counting on Chris to guide us and give us the information from the ground. We had no other sources. There was no American outpost. There was no, American military presence. Eventually, other Americans representing different agencies were able to get into Benghazi and begin to do the same work, but they, of course, couldn't do that work overtly, which is why we wanted a diplomat who could be publicly meeting with people to try to get the best assessment. But it was always going to be a constant risk, and we knew that.
And so let me go back to the risk in 2011, because there was a lot of communication, once again, from your senior staff, from the State Department, to you or from you in 2011. And in fact, that is when Gaddafi fell. He fell in 2011. But then, when we go to 2012, Libya, Benghazi, Chris Stevens, the staff there, they seem to fall off your radar in 2012, and the situation's getting much worse in 2012. It was getting much worse. And let me just share for you, in your records that we have reviewed, there is not one email to you or from you in 2012 when an explosive device went off at our compound in April. There's not a single email in your records about that explosive device. So my question is, this was a very important mission in 2011. You sent Chris Stevens there, but yet when our compound is attacked in 2012, what kind of culture was created in the State Department that your folks couldn't tell you in an email about a bomb in April of 2012?
Well, Congresswoman, I did not conduct most of the business that I did on behalf of our country on email. I conducted it in meetings. I read massive amounts of memos, great deal of classified information. I made a lot of secure phone calls. I was in and out of the White House all the time. There were a lot of things that happened that I was aware of and that I was reacting to. If you were to be in my office in the State Department, I didn't have a computer. I did not do the vast majority of my work on email, and I bet there's a lot of Sid Blumenthal's emails in there from 2011, too.
Well,
and so I think that there were, I don't want you to have a mistaken impression about what I did and how I did it. Most of my work was not done on emails with my closest aides, with officials in the State Department, officials in the rest of the government, as well as the White House and people around the world.
And thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure that it's not all done on emails, Madam Secretary, and there are meetings and there are discussions. And so then when our compound took a second attack on June 6th, when a bomb blew a wall through the compound then, no emails at all. But I am interested in knowing, who were you meeting with? Who were you huddling with? How were you informed about those things? Because there is nothing in the emails that talks about two significant attacks on our compounds in 2012. There was a lot of information in 2011 about issues and security posture, and yet nothing in 2012.
Well, I'd be happy to explain. Every morning when I arrived at the State Department, usually between 8 and 8:30, I had a personal one-on-one briefing from the representative of the Central Intelligence Agency, who shared with me the highest level of classified information that I was to be aware of on a daily basis. I then had a meeting with the top officials of the State Department every day that I was in town. That's where a lot of information, including threats and attacks on our facilities, was shared. I also had a weekly meeting every Monday with all of the officials, the assistant secretaries and others, so that I could be brought up to date on any issue that they were concerned about. During the day, I received hundreds of pages of memos, many of them classified, some of them so top secret that they were brought into my office in a locked briefcase that I had to read and immediately return to the courier. And I was constantly at the White House in the Situation Room, meeting with the National Security Advisor and others. I would also be meeting with officials in the State Department, foreign officials and others. So there was a lot going on during every day. I did not email during the day, and except on rare occasions when I was able to, but I didn't conduct the business that I did primarily on email. That is not how I gathered information, assessed information, asked the hard questions of the people that I worked with.
It appears that leaving Benghazi, with respect to all of that danger, leaving Benghazi was not an option in 2012, and I yield back.
Well, if I could just quickly respond, there was never a recommendation from any intelligence official in our government, from any official in the State Department, or from any other person with knowledge of our presence in Benghazi to shut down Benghazi, even after the two attacks that the compound suffered. And perhaps, you would wonder why, but I can tell you that it was thought that the mission in Benghazi, in conjunction with the CIA mission, was vital to our national interests.
Gentlelady from Indiana yields back. Chair will now briefly recognize Mr.
We're going to continue our live coverage in just a moment. Much more right after a quick break.
I was asking Secretary Clinton.
Dr. Ben Carson is one one of the Republican candidates that everybody's talking about right now. He's neck and neck with Donald Trump, and we have a lot to talk about today. So please, let's welcome author of the new book, A More Perfect Union, presidential candidate, Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Ben, I gotta say, you have such a calm, measured way of speaking. It's, you know, it's really quite different from everybody else who's so bombastic. I just have to ask before we do anything else, do you ever yell?
No.
No?
I used to.
Yep.
I used to be very hot-tempered, got into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, we read the book. You wrote about it. And you read the Bible and came out a changed man from the bathroom. That was a very interesting story.
Well, I came to the understanding that to lash out at people, to try to punch somebody in the face was not a sign of strength, it was a sign of weakness.
Even when they get your Starbucks order wrong? Because, you know, sometimes I get very curious.
Well, let's get into it, because, you know, you've been making a couple of controversial comments over the last couple of days. The Hitler Nazi Germany could happen here.
That's not what I said.
Okay, well, I'm just giving you...
That's the spin.
Okay,
that's
so,
the spin.
Well, then I want to give you an opportunity to say what you said and explain what you meant. But I want to give you the other two.
Okay.
Would not support a Muslim president if his religion is inconsistent with the Constitution.
Okay.
And then it's okay to have a Confederate flag on private property.
Okay.
That one's right.
I don't have any problems. I can explain all of those quite easily.
So I'm asking.
That's the reason that I wrote that book, by the way.
Right.
You know, it's about our laws and what is correct in this country. And this is a pluralistic society.
Right.
So that means no my way or the highway stuff. It means we have to learn how to get along together. And there's give and take with that. Now, what I was saying about the Hitler comment,
right.
And I purposely said that because I knew the left wing would go crazy. He said Hitler! You know, that's
I don't think that's what happened.
Yes,
but why not just explain what you said so we understand?
So what I said is most of the people in Nazi Germany did not believe in what Hitler was doing. But did they speak up? No. They kept their mouths shut. And when you do that, you are compromising your freedom and the freedom of people who come behind you. You have to be willing to stand up for what you believe in.
He won the election in Germany. He won the election.
It doesn't matter what he did. We know he was an evil man.
But also, you know, there were people standing up, just so you know, the White Rose Society. There were a lot of folks that were... They might not have been enough, but there were people.
But that was the point.
That was your
point.
I want people in America to be willing to stand up for what they believe in.
Okay, let me ask. We do. On this show especially.
Yeah.
But, you know, you're a neurosurgeon, which, you know, I'm very impressed with that. You separated Siamese twins, right? Fabulous. But I know also you're a scientist, and yet I was reading that you don't believe in evolution. Okay, now wait, before you go any further, what I want to say to you is, don't take this wrong, Mrs. Carson, I'm not asking for a date. But how do you feel about taking a trip to the Museum of Natural History with me? We could do like a little walkthrough and have a discussion about it.
Believe me, I would be happy to do that. I can have a very in-depth discussion with you. I've had discussions with Nobel laureates on this. And they have to admit that, well, we don't know everything. You know, the fact of the matter...
What do you make of that fact that they just dug up some bones 100 million years ago?
Let me explain. First of all, evolution, microevolution versus macroevolution are two different things.
Oh, this is too in the weeds for us right now. We don't have the time for this conversation. Let's just go on the date.
We're talking about natural selection when we're talking about microevolution. And I believe, yes, organisms have an ability to adapt to their environment, and they have the ability to change.
Right.
Now, the evolutionists say that is proof positive of evolution. I say it's proof positive of an intelligent creature who gave his creatures the ability to adapt to their environment so that they don't have to start over every 50 years.
But that's your faith. You believe that because that's your faith, right?
And I have said...
Why not believe in both?
Do you believe in both? Can you believe in both?
And I have said, you know, people are allowed to believe in what they believe. Some people believe that something came from nothing, and then they believe that it exploded, and we had a perfectly organized org. I don't believe that. I don't have enough faith to believe that, but I don't denigrate people who believe that.
No.
Okay, so people need to respect where you're coming from. I want to ask you, right after that tragic shooting in Oregon last week, you said gun control is not the answer. And I know you're a big advocate for mental health, but this morning you said that you'd be very comfortable if kindergarten teachers had guns in the classroom. Why do you think that's a good idea?
Not all kindergarten teachers. I said people who are trained and understand all the implications. And you obviously are not just going to have a weapon sitting on the kindergarten teacher's desk. And I know
Where
that's...
would the weapon be?
It would be secured in a place where kids could not get to it.
So if a gunman comes in, if a gunman comes in with an AK-45 or an AR-15, how fast can that teacher go to the locked drawer and get that gun?
Well, I want that teacher trained.
You want that teacher trained?
I want that teacher trained in diversionary tactics and whatever needs to be done in order to get there. And I want there to be other people in that school who also know how to get to that.
Why do we want to live like this? I was a school teacher. I don't want to live like that.
You got... Go ahead.
We don't want to live that way.
No.
Michelle, do you want to go?
I do have a quick question, because, you know, you were asked recently about what you would do with Hurricane Joaquin, and, you know, you said you didn't know, and actually the look on your press secretary's face was... Hilarious and priceless, and we love her. But do you have an... we have it right here. That's, like, my favorite reaction, maybe of all time. But do you have an answer now?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I hope you saw the press conference. We were talking about something completely different. We were on the way out to the bus, and someone brings up a new subject. I said, I don't know. I'm getting out of here.
But to prepare for a hurricane, I mean, I grew up in Miami, so I'm like, you know, even we have some things in place when a hurricane comes.
Clearly, we have a whole series of things in places for hurricanes. And quite frankly, if you're at the point where the president has to enact the things, you have not done your homework. That should be already in place and ready to go.
Mr. Carson, I have a question for you, and I want to also talk about your book, but my first quick thing is, the one thing I do like about you is your tax idea. Everyone should pay the same tax, flat tax, and get rid of the IRA. High five. Cool beans for you. But I want to hear about your book, the IRS. What did I say?
She said IRA. I was wondering about that.
Sorry.
I knew what you meant.
I know. Well, we all mess up sometimes, right? So please talk about your book, The New Perfect Union, for us, please.
Well, everybody knows that we have a Constitution, but not many people know what's in it. And it's very important because the founders of this nation said that our freedoms and our system is based upon a well-informed and educated populace. And if you don't have that, then it becomes very easy to fool people. For instance, let me give you a perfect example. If you're not well educated, someone could come along and say, you know what, the economy is great. Unemployment is down to 5.1%, which is essentially full employment. We're in great shape. But if you're well educated and informed, you know that you can make that number anything you want based on who you include and exclude, and that the labor force participation rate, which is the number of people eligible to work who are actually working, is at a 37-year low. And we know we have problems and we need to fix them. And these are not Democrat or Republican problems. These are problems that affect our whole society. And we have to stop making everything into a Democrat or Republican.
I agree with that.
I know your wife's in the audience right now. You've been married to your beautiful wife, Candy, for 40 years. She said she did not want you to run for president until she became a grandmother. You are now a grandmother of 2. Why did you not want him to run for president until you became a grandma?
You know, we've been married 40 years.
Yay.
And we celebrated in New Hampshire, 600 of our closest friends. But getting back to the 2 granddaughters, one of them was born on leap day in 2012, so, you know, she didn't even have a birthday this year, but she had her party. The other one's going to turn 2 next month. And when you look in those little faces and you think about the debt that our country has, we're at $18.5 trillion. Which to pay it off, if you were to pay it off at a rate of $10 million every day, 365 days a year, 365 days a year, it would take you 5,000 years. That's how bad it is. We're the first generation to make it worse for the next generation. When I look at these little faces, I say, we can't do that to them. When I see other people's babies, because I don't see my own, because we're not home, but when I see these other little, you know, it just makes me more determined that whatever I can do, I'm going to do.
Are you going to put her in your cabinet, Dr. Carson?
Okay, well, we're going to talk more when we come right back. Hey, so we're back for Dr. Ben Carson. He's really one of the leaders in the polls. And one of the other quotes that we've sort of gotten from the research is that you sort of feel that there's not actually a war on women, but there may be a war on what's inside of women. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the babies. I mean, killing babies all over the place. And, you know, we should be, I think people can probably understand. In my case, I spent my entire career trying to preserve life and give people quality of life, even operating on babies in the womb, operating all night long sometimes on premature babies. And I get to meet those people, you know, when they're adults and productive adults. There is no way you can convince me that they're not important, that they're just a mass of cells and that you can do anything to them.
I want to ask you this. Have you met with the women who have to make these horrendous decisions when they have to make them of whether or not they can bring a child into the world? I mean, we talk about bringing children into the world all the time, but periodically, some women feel, I just can't. And are you empathetic to them? Because we just had
empathetic.
Oh, good. Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
Very empathetic. And what I have said is that this is a job for us in the private sector. What we need to do is make sure that we provide adequate daycare centers for these mothers so that they can get their GED, their associate's degree, their bachelor's degree, their master's degree.
You're assuming that these are mothers who aren't educated. I mean, I'm talking about women who make that. Of them. I don't know that you can.
Let me tell you. Let me tell you a fact. Let me tell you a fact. The fact is, a lot of those young girls who are having babies out of wedlock, when they have that first baby, they stop their education. And that child is 4 times as likely to grow up in poverty. We as a society have an obligation to do what's necessary to stop that cycle from occurring.
So how important is birth control then to the Republican Party? They should be out there regularly applauding Planned Parenthood for supplying birth control, mammograms, and everything else. Why are they against Planned Parenthood? Are you against birth control, too?
I don't speak for the Republican Party. I speak for me.
Okay, for yourself. Are you against birth control also?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. And so I guess you believe in daycare centers and maternity leave and food stamps and all the things that go along with raising a kid if you don't have the money.
Here's what I believe in, because I get sick and tired of people, particularly progressives, saying Carson grew up poor, he must have benefited from government programs, and now he wants to withdraw all the programs from poor people.
We do not assume
Wait a minute. I've heard that so many times. You've heard it too. It's a bunch of crap. And what I really actually want to do is provide people with a mechanism for coming out of a state of dependency and climbing the ladder and becoming part of the fabric of America.
This is a great thing.
We agree with that.
Yes, but I think my question. Actually, I'm going to let everybody else ask their questions.
It takes me to Obamacare, because you said it's the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery. How is it slavery and over 9 million people have it?
Let me tell you why.
Why?
Because this is supposed to be a country that is of, for, and by the people. The government is supposed to be there to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With this particular act, the government comes along and says, don't care what you people think. This is what we're doing. We're cramming it down your throat, and if you don't like it, too bad.
Getting into the war.
That essentially shifts.
Because we've done that. That seems to be the way of the nation.
But it shifts the relationship between the people and the government. The people are supposed to be at the pinnacle. The government works for us. It's not the other way around. And we need to restore that.
Okay.
That's very important.
All right. Are we done?
Anybody else?
I just wanted to ask one last thing. I mean, you said that you don't necessarily relate to the Republicans, and you don't really say you're a Democrat either. So why do you feel this way?
I said I don't speak for the Republicans. I didn't say I didn't relate to them.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing.
Is there anything about the Republicans that you don't relate to?
Well, I am not a highly partisan person. The issues that affect us, imminent financial collapse if we don't change our ways.
Forgive me, Dr. Ben.
Forgive me. They're not Republican or Democrat issues.
Dr. Ben Carson, y'all. Members, wait. Members of the audience, you're all going home with Dr. Ben's book, A More Perfect Union. Thank you, Dr. Ben.